marketing is essentially responsible for two functions. The first is, are you saturating channels that your target audience already lives in frequently and consistently with a message that resonates? The second piece of marketing is, can you identify signals of readiness and can you get that person to do what you want them to do?
Today, we're going to be chatting with Margaret Kelsey. Margaret spent the last decade plus building scalable, effective marketing programs and teams for B2B SaaS companies.
We all had a love affair with SEO for a while, but is a little bit more difficult and nuanced now. But it is just a channel.
And over the last couple of years, she's built her own business as an advisor, teaching founders and their marketers how to do the same.
When you look at marketing as just the visible external application of marketing instead of the machine that you're trying to build, it's easy to just be very chaotic and kind of get thrown. And that creates like a level of what I call executive thrashing that's really difficult for a team.
In today's episode, we're going to explore what does fractional help and when you might want to hire a fractional employee, how to trust a fractional employee and how much lead time to give them to prove their strategies, when you might want to bring on a fractional employee full-time, and at the very end, how fractional help will evolve over the next couple of years.
A freelancer, you might bring them in, you might say, I need you to accomplish this set of tasks, whereas fractional is somebody that you're bringing in to really feel like they have ownership over the results.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Plugin.fm, where we extract key lessons from top entrepreneurs to inspire your business growth. My name is Patrick Rollins. I'm an e-commerce expert and educator, and I'm here with my co-host Goran, a content marketing specialist and the CMO at Freemius. Let's get into the episode. Welcome to the show, Margaret.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to get right into fractional help because I think it is totally underused and other people this season have already been talking about it. So you have been on both sides. You have been fractional help. You have hired fractional help. What is it? And then when do you think a company is ready for it?
Yeah. So fractional is, I think of it as a little bit maybe more strategic than freelance. But it's any time that you're bringing somebody into your organization as not a full-time employee, you have a specific set of outcomes that you want to get. And you know that there's somebody with that specific background that you can bring in on a part-time basis to accomplish that. So if you get up to the really strategic level, like CMO, you're going to be delivering them a set of outcomes that you want to see. Like, hey, I want you to build out our marketing strategy and the initial functions of it. But even if you're thinking about bringing in like a fractional podcast lead, right? You're going to set them up with certain measures of success. And so it's not really fractional. I don't really think of it as like, hey, we don't even know what's going on or we don't know what to do. That's, I think of more as like an advisor. I think once you're set up and have a clear direction of what you want to accomplish, that's when you would bring in somebody fractional.
Let's quickly jump into the difference between fractional and freelance. To me, I feel like a fractional employee owns a lot more. Exactly. Is that the right way to think about that?
Yeah, exactly. They have more ownership than and a freelance. You're really just giving them tasks. You're saying, here, go do this one thing, or I need you to execute on this plan. And I think of fractional as having more ownership and more skin in the game in terms of actually having the outcome that's desired. So a freelancer, you might bring them in. You might say, I need you to accomplish this set of tasks. If you decide that that's actually not working for your strategy anymore, you might pivot. Whereas fractional is somebody that you're bringing in to really feel like they have ownership over the results.
Yeah, thanks for that. So in my experience, because interesting story, I started at Freemius as a fractional CMO first. And what I noticed, because I had other fractional roles before this, is most people tend to kind of put an equal sign between a fractional, let's say CMO, or a marketing lead and an advisor, which I don't think really is the same. But just for the sake of it, can you explain also what is the difference between someone who is fractional here or just an outside consultant or advisor?
Absolutely. And I've done both with my my own business. I've been advising and I've been fractional. And I think it is about that ownership piece. I think as an advisor, you get to come into conversations, you get to diagnose maybe where things are going wrong. You get to give advice and then you get to leave and it's up to the other people to actually implement. I think when you're fractional, you're actually coming in and you're implementing and changing systems or changing processes internally. And you actually have agency to have those conversations to make it happen. And I think with advising, it really is almost a sense of freedom. I loved my time advising because you get to go and give great advice, and then it's up to the folks to either accept it or not.
I have a love-hate relationship with advising because I would say 80% of the time it's not.
Yeah, yeah, I know. So, yeah, where felt a little bit of freedom, it can also feel frustrating to have continued conversations where you're pointing out the same thing and saying, "Hey, remember 6 months ago when I told you this would be an issue?"
That is exactly the conversation. So,
Yep.
so how do you know if a business is ready for fractional? Like, what do you need to be hitting problems of some, hitting, upper bounds where you stop growth, or yeah, how do you know that you're ready?
Yeah, I think if an organization has a clear understanding of their problems, then they're able to find somebody fractional with the skill set to then um, create change or to manage those problems. I think the hardest thing is if an organization really is sitting there being like, I don't even know the first thing of what to do, because then you need somebody that's really generic. And if we're talking about the CMO level, there's so many different types of CMOs, right? And then you even go lower than that. There's so many different types of owners of different types of marketing programs, whether it's content marketing or demand gen or even marketing ops, right? And so I think once an organization has a handle on the problem that they're trying to solve for, they can then find a fractional person with the skill set in the background rather than just more of a generalist to come in and diagnose those issues. I think that's where the fractional really helps, is if you can find that exact skill set that you know would be able to solve your problems. But if you're just sitting there in the ether of like, everything's messy and my hair's on fire and I have no idea even what's wrong, then you're not ready to hire fractional yet. You have to do a lot of that diagnosis work first.
So would you say that getting an advisor or a consultant is like a step before getting someone fractional?
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of the times in my advising work, we would then diagnose what would be the next thing in the marketing function that would need to be built, or if it even was a lack of leadership and ownership over those top level things, and bring in a fractional head of marketing or a fractional head of whatever the function is that we need to build out.
Okay, so I think I understand the when. I think my next thing is maybe the who. So you understand you want to hire someone fractionally. How do you? To me, actually, the biggest problem is trust. How do I trust this person?
I mean, isn't that constantly the struggle of marketing,
I,
right? Is, can we give them enough time to actually prove that it's working?
yeah.
It does depend on the function that you're hiring somebody fractional for. I think you have to trust on past experience. Fractional is rarely something that you want. Like, how I think about hiring for internal roles, I'm very willing to give someone a chance to do it for the first time, right?
Hmm.
I'm really interested in pulling up people and maybe giving them the next great opportunity. When you bring somebody in fractional, you kind of want them to already have that experience, and you want them to sort of be able to replicate that experience. So I think their background, their track record, their history is really important. I do think it's very much a relationship game to be a fractional worker. And so the more that you can get warm intros to people that people have worked
Hmm.
with before, or have sort of that trust level, it's not like the big funnels that marketers build for companies. It's very much like oh, hey, I know somebody that's going to help you out. And so it does take a lot of networking to find the right fractional person. But it is built on trust. And I would say the other thing is you don't want that fractional person to have more than, I would say, maybe 2 to 3 clients at a time. I think
Hmm.
3 might be max for fractional, right? Because fractional, you probably want them in for 15, 20 hours a week. And how are they doing that for more than maybe 2 companies at a time?
Yeah.
Ideally, it's, 1 and they have some other things that they're doing and they just want to give less time to an organization than full time. So I think that is definitely probably the how you go about it.
Yeah. So when you, for instance, you find yourself in a situation you're hiring someone fractionally, would you kind of prefer to that person already having some experience in fractional roles, or are you just looking at their overall skill set and just let's say, success when they were like full time?
Yeah, no, they could be first time fractional. I'm totally fine with that. I just need to have them have run that program or that at that altitude before and have some success attached to it.
Cool. So my follow-up question is, uh, this is a podcast that has a lot of techie people listening, and most of them are not really, super experienced in marketing, and they know that marketing is an important factor. So can you share just some of the like early successes that like a tech founder should look at to kind of understand if like the fractional relationship is going in the right direction or not?
Yeah, I mean, it is so dependent on the type of marketing or the channels that you're going to engage with on what success would look like. Normally, when I'm starting out with a non marketing background founder, I really try to reset what marketing is at the highest level. And so I say marketing is essentially responsible for two functions. The first is, are you saturating channels that your target audience already lives in frequently and consistently with a message that resonates? That takes all the marketing jargon out of it, right? We're going to pull all the way up. We're not going to call that brand. We're not going to call that awareness. Sometimes I call it saturation, but are you showing up in the channels that you know your target audience already lives in frequently, consistently with a message that resonates? There's a lot of things that you have to figure out there. You have to have a defined target audience. You have to understand how they walk through the world and what they bump up against every single day. You have to understand the channels that they value and the ones that they listen to or experience or live in, right? Could be events or whatever. And you have to know what your message is and whether or not it resonates. And then you have to measure how consistently you're showing up. So that is a big function. And there's a lot of assumptions that you already have that figured out. The second piece of marketing is, can you identify signals of readiness? And can you get that person to do what you want them to do? Can you get them to talk to your sales team? Can you get them into your product? Can you get them to even a customer? Can you get them to sign back up? Can you get them to expand in their ACV? So that second piece is the conversion focused part of marketing. And most people focus there. And I think a lot of founders want to focus there. But whether or not, like, depending on what you kind of marketing programs you need to build, you would find somebody for those pieces, right? And it could be one person that's in charge of the entire thing. But there's success metrics in each one of them. How confident are we in our target audience that that's actually the right person to sell to? How confident are we in that the channels are the right ones? How confident are we in our messaging? How confident are we that we understand how they make decisions and what influences them? And can we actually create marketing programs to get them to do something rather than just hear about us? And so there's success metrics all within each channel. But ideally, you want to break it out like that and then have somebody recommend and say, hey, I'll be able to show you this success metric based on, the work I'm going to be doing.
Wow, I really like that reset there. I kind of think if I could summarize, if I could distill what I think other people think of marketing, it's just getting people to your website. Like that is ultimately that's kind of all they care about is like eyeballs on the web, and that's a very superficial way to look at it, but it's just eyeballs on the website.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is like we all had a love affair with SEO for a while, but the reason that we loved it, it was because it was a very easy way to grab somebody that was showing you a signal of readiness. They were searching for the things that they cared about, and you could get them to your website, and then you could get them to do something you wanted them to do, right? Sign up for your newsletter, get into a demo, whatever it was. And so I like to also pull that up of like, that was a channel that worked very well for a while, is a little bit more difficult and nuanced now, but it is just a channel. It's not the end all be all. And I think a lot of founders, when they see marketing tactics out there, whether it's like saturating LinkedIn or whatever the new like marketing du jour excitement thing, right? We need to, create a bunch of blog posts. We need to like create a bunch of newsletters, whatever it is. I like to bring it back to like, that's just a channel, right? It might not even be a channel, it might be a tactic that they're super in love with. We need to like, post on TikTok. Like maybe you do, but maybe you don't, right? And I think that's the hardest thing is when you look at marketing as just the application of marketing instead of the machine that you're trying to build, it's easy to just be very chaotic and kind of get thrown. And then you read a LinkedIn article and you say, we got to go this direction. And that creates like a level of what I call executive thrashing that's really difficult for a team.
Yeah, but how do you actually survive that as a fractional role? So, for instance, I worked with a lot of businesses of all shapes and sizes, and like in my personal background, like they were like focused on like the numbers, and in my mind, the reporting that we have now in marketing is very broken, very like surface level and superficial. And you can even, as a marketing person, you can even gamify it if that is what you really want. So, but how you kind of get like consensus with people that like, we first need to build a foundation before we can build a house.
So at OpenView, we split out goals in two different ways that I think was really effective and helped people wrap their brain around it. We had vital goals, things that we had existing numbers, data metrics on that we were trying to improve. And then we had change goals. And those were things that we would do for the first time where we actually had no idea if the set of activities would have the intended effect. And so for those, we measured success on whether or not we kept to the work plan of the intended activities, not about whether or not those activities actually influence the outcome. We would then look at it and say, is this something we want to do or do we need to pivot? But there is a sense of the first time that you're collecting metrics on anything that you're doing for the first time, it's hard to goal a team specifically on actually improving them because you have no understanding if that's the right set of activities or not. So goal your team on following the plan that you think is the best one to change those metrics. And then they can feel successful even if the metrics didn't actually improve in the way that you wanted. And then that sets them up for like this culture of creativity where they're like, oh yeah, I still won. Like I still did it. We didn't actually improve it the way that we wanted to. So we got to try something new. But it's not that I failed because I didn't improve those metrics because we were doing it for the first time. So who knows, But a lot of organizations do have ongoing programs that they have enough data that they say, this is working, but I want it to work better, or I want it to be cheaper, or I want to spend less hours and have it work exactly the same way. And so then you would create a goal on that, right? Can we find cheaper resources to do the same thing? Can we automate some of this? Can we actually improve the metrics by doing something a little bit differently? But those are two separate set of goals.
I had an experience, this was a few years back, where I was building Facebook ads for a company. And my goal was like, let's just get through the process. We're going to have 20 different ads. We'll learn a little bit from the natural A/B testing in Facebook about which types of ads do better or worse. Then we can focus on profitability later. But a week before I launched them, the CEO was like, oh no, these need to be profitable immediately. Like there was no like learning phase and then we'll figure out how to optimize. It was, oh no. We expected this needs to be a winning campaign immediately. And it's I don't want to say impossible, but it's a very different mindset to try something new and it must perform immediately. It seems like a recipe for success. I think as an owner of a business, you want to give people that.
Yeah. I mean, listen, that is ideally the outcome, right? Because you are so confident that that is the right channel. You're so confident that that's a channel that your target audience already is in. You're so confident in the fact that your message already resonates that, yes, of course, when we turn this on, we'll have profitability immediately. But there are a lot of assumptions in there. And if you haven't built out and experimented to make sure that each one of those assumptions is true, especially with is your message resonating, then it has to be experimentation. And I do think what you're getting at, Patrick, is like this idea of executive alignment. And that is very, very difficult to do because sometimes, especially when I was advising, I would have the similar conversations and see heads nod around the table of, okay, we're good with this. Like, okay, this is a brand program. It's just about like saturating and priming and making sure people know about us and like us. And then we would get to the goal planning session and it would say, but these need to produce leads. This program actually needs to be measured in terms of how many leads come from it. And, you're kind of like, have to have that conversation again. I do think that marketers uniquely do have the skill set for executive alignment. They're just pointing their attention in the wrong place. So we know how to find out who our target audience is, right? We know how to understand the words they use, the language that they use, what's important to them. We do this for our external audiences, and very rarely do we spend the time to actually write that out for what our executives care about. What does my CEO care about? How does he or she communicate? What are the metrics that they are most pressed by the board on? And how do I make sure that I frame this in a way that they feel comfortable with? But we don't take the time to do that. But I do think that marketers have that skill set intrinsically. We just start pointing it in the right direction.
Okay, so I didn't want to change directions a little bit here. If you hire someone, what are the things that you've learned if you hire a fractional person, what are the things you've learned to help them succeed? Is it, part of me is like, is it Monday, Wednesday, Friday full time, or is it half days each day, or is it, you do want to hire someone fractional? How do you make sure they succeed?
I don't think that there's a set schedule of like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or like half days or whatever. I think it works best for that person's schedule probably. And probably they're most interested in fractional because they want to have more ownership over their schedule and being able to do certain things. So I'm not hard and fast on exactly what that meeting cadence should be. I think they should be involved in, if it's a fractional CMO or head of marketing, they need to be involved in any of the weekly meetings of the leadership team, because they need to have that context. And then if they're managing anyone or managing different programs, they need to be obviously involved in those team meetings, as well, to make sure that they have the full context. And then outside of that, I do agree with you that they need to be out of other like silly meetings as much as possible. Thankfully, now we have so many of these, AI assistants that can join meetings and give them a summary and things like that. Like I just had one join kind of an advising client of mine that's on pause, and they joined a meeting, and instead of me having to go through that meeting, I got an email summary of what was discussed and kind of came to be in that meeting. Took me 5 minutes instead of sitting in a 45-minute meeting. So we have the ability now, especially with technology, to give people more context in an easier way than what we used to do, which is have everyone sit in every meeting. So if you don't think that person's going to contribute to the meeting, but you think that it's helpful context for them to understand, have them set up one of these, AI assistants, have that AI assistant join the meeting. They can review the summary and have all that context in a very short period of time.
How do you give people all the context they need to understand that, like, 3 years ago, this person did this thing, and that's why we now do this thing this way? Like, because sometimes it's, I guess I think a lot of businesses accidentally create bad processes as opposed to intentionally. So how do you give people like the right context so they can fix these mistakes, fix these process mistakes? I guess that's the right question.
Yeah, I feel like the way you framed that, like once you uncover that, the way you framed it is great, which is just like, hey, listen, this is something that legacy wise, I understand that we've always done it that way, but let's just try in a new way and see what happens. That does change. That does like it's totally affected by the culture of the team, whether or not they're open and receptive to that. Um, Setting the stage when you first come in, that's going to be some of the work that you're going to be doing, and that it's no judgment, that, there will be optimizations. Startups, especially, they move really quickly. And like you said, sometimes it's not intentional. Sometimes it's just default, or somebody didn't know and, set up a pattern and taught a bunch of people how to do it in a way that could be optimized. And I think that's the way to frame it too, is just like, hey, what got you here isn't going to get you to the next place. And there's nothing wrong about what got you here, right? It's totally great, but there's going to be opportunities to improve. And like that's going to launch us to the next place. And so there's no judgment on the fact that it hasn't been done right before, because the organization still exists. And that's the whole goal of startups and businesses, is survive, right? And so it's like, cool, you guys are here. That's awesome. You've done lots of hard work to get here, but let's go to that next level. And we will have to change things inevitably to get there, because that's how you grow, is you change.
I think like a natural follow-up to this question is like, how do you basically kind of have that first hard conversation, which, like, as for instance, in my experience as a fractional CMO, I come to a situation where like a company has like an idea, like what they do and what they want to like invest and how this could kind of get them from A to Z. But obviously, like when I do some analysis and look into what's really going on, we have that conversation that like is actually, you have to kind of drop a bomb. And like, for instance, they wanted to invest in like in a new content program, but actually like they had, for instance, in my experience, I'm not naming names, they had like a duplicated knowledge base that was creating like a monster of like duplicated content that's obviously, a freak show. So how do you kind of have that conversation where like, you are actually getting into the door with like a proposal, but you have to kind of completely spin it?
Yeah, I think you have to align on the business outcomes and the business goals rather than the work stream itself. So you say, hey, listen, I think we all want to grow, right? We all want to make sure that this is set up and optimized and then we have a sturdy foundation in order to be able to do the fun projects, right? And I'm sure deduping a content, duplicative content is not fun. That's not what most people are like jazzed up to do as a work stream, right? Yeah. But I think if you can, especially at the executive level, you pull it all the way back to the business goals and you can point out like, or even the risk of it, right? If we continue as is and we just do the fun projects and we don't do any of this, like there's marketing debt, like there is tech debt, right? Because a lot of marketing is using technology these days. So you can pitch it as that, which is like, especially in a founder's brain, if they are engineering or product and that's their background, you can frame it as tech debt, right? Like, hey, we have marketing debt the same way that we have tech debt, right? And that might be old messaging that we've never actually gone back and revisited. It might be, existing programs that should be cut and eliminated to make room in terms of bandwidth and budget for new experiments and things that we can do. It could be actual tech debt of your analytics or your CRM or duplicative content or whatever it is. Could be SEO tech debt or whatever it is, but they do understand that idea of like when you run really quickly and you're just building, you accumulate debt that then you need to pay down. And so we need to pay this down in marketing before we can do any of the fun projects.
I haven't had much success in getting people to. I understand that message. I don't think I've been the right person to communicate that to the executives and get them to listen in my previous roles. So I'll have to bug you for some specifics on how to talk with executives.
And listen, I'm maybe successful at this 50% of the time. Like getting executive alignment, even though I said that marketers do have a unique skill set to be able to do it well, it doesn't mean that you always also get your way, right? Or that you're ever really, it could be like that they say, yeah, I totally understand that, but we got to keep building. I don't care about marketing debt. And so how I think about that, especially when it's a founder CEO, is ultimately anyone working for somebody that started a company is working in terms of building that person's vision. And if you have different visions and you cannot align, you can either disagree and commit, or you can find another organization that you're really aligned with. But I do have a sense of like, I don't know if it's a boundary or just like a sense of peace with the idea of like there are people out there building their dream, building their company, building their mission and their vision. And if I wanted to do that by myself and I wanted to make the final decision, I should go start my own company, right? Start my own software company and build it from scratch. Ultimately, anyone that's employed at a company is following the person at the top's vision. And it's totally fine if you have a different vision and you can't disagree and commit, or you can't influence it in the way that you want, but you have to make that decision on whether or not that's a work that you want to be doing or you're willing to do.
To me, a really good employee is someone who has ownership, like cares about something. Again, it's like you own this thing, you care about it more than a freelancer, right? So I guess how do you get a fractional employee to have ownership and update that piece of content that hasn't been updated in 7 years?
When you bring in somebody fractional, yes, they should have ownership, and that is based on also personality, right? Some people just have an intrinsic feeling of ownership more than other people do, but also based on maybe there is some kicker, some benefit, some bonus structure to a fractional role if they do actually influence the KPIs or influence them in a way so that they're, I do think, what gets measured gets managed. And so the more that you can give them KPIs or metrics the same way you would give an internal employee, the more that they're going to be, have that sense of ownership, but also they're going to feel more comfortable that they're actually contributing and that their job safety is there, right? If they know that they're responsible for this core metric and it's improving.
Love it. So I did want to get to psychological safety. So I'm glad you just helped us transition there. So on any team, especially when you're doing something creative, I feel like psychological safety, and just to define it for people who haven't heard it, but it's the ability to like voice a concern or a dissenting opinion and know that you're not going to be like punished for it. Is that kind of a decent
Yeah, being
definition.
able to kind of share freely without fear of punishment, retribution, or anything else. Yeah, for sure.
And so how do you instill that in, again, a fractional employee, someone who's recently joined the team and needs to have
Very
some
easy.
creativity and possibly be wrong?
Yeah, and very easy to cut if like we're real honest.
Yes.
Yeah. So sometimes I've seeded that in team conversations before where I will have somebody challenge me. I'll talk to somebody on my team beforehand and say, I want you to challenge me on this point so I can show what the reaction would be, right? It's hard. A 0 to 1 to psychological safety is tough because nobody has any data points on how it'll go, right? So I have done that before where I talk to one of my teammates beforehand and say, hey, I want you in the meeting to challenge me on this so people can see how I react. And that opens the floodgates of people feeling way comfortable to be able to do it. And I think another thing is it really is about the leader's emotional reaction and ability to emotionally regulate. And to be curious, right? Hey, are you seeing different things than I am? Like I came up with this plan or I came up with this direction and I'm pitching my team on it. But if you have different data points than I do, I want to be curious about where you're coming from, right? Do you have a different background? Did you see different things at different organizations? And that's the mindset of a leader that I think prompts that emotional safety. Is really being curious instead of reactive or thinking that you somehow have all the answers. Because odds are the folks that are actually doing the work on a daily basis have way more context than you do if you're doing your job right, right? Like I feel like as a leader, you have the context of the business goals and you have the context of the business challenges at a different altitude. And ideally, you are pushing that down to your team in appropriate timing and appropriate doses and whatnot. You're not saying like, hey, we're about to run out of money, everyone leave the job. But you want to like filter that appropriately. But ideally, they have as much context as they need to do the work and they have all of the data on a daily basis and all of like the stuff that they're seeing. So they're actually probably better at making decisions about their functions than you are.
I don't think I've ever heard of someone seating someone to challenge them to demonstrate psychological safety. So I just wanted to give you some kudos for that. I I have managed people in the past, and I would always try to make fun of myself to make it clear that I can take a little bit of criticism. But I think having someone challenge you is an even better idea. So I really love that.
But from the other side, because like let's say people who are listening to this podcast probably are exploring to get like someone fractional to kind of help out with marketing. Does this also imply that you have to be kind of open to being challenged as well to make this work?
I think as human beings, we all should be open to be challenged all the time. But I understand that that's just, I think everyone should be in therapy. I think everyone should be working on their own stuff. And I think everyone should kind of work on their ego and be willing and curious. I understand that that's not necessarily the workplaces that we live in, but ideally, especially like coming from the person who has, been fractional and has been the employee side of it, it's also really beneficial that you get to make the decisions on who you work with, right? You get to meet the team, you get to meet the founder or the CEO, you get to meet the other executives, and you get to kind of test out whether or not they're willing to be challenged or not. And I think good people will naturally go to teams where they can voice their opinions and voice their challenges and feel that sense of psychological safety. And then those will be the companies that win because they'll have the best talent. And so it is actually like there is business value to founders and CEOs to work on their ability to be challenged because you will have better business outcomes.
Yeah, but like in a context of let's say, you're getting to like your first fractional hire, so it's like your sixth step into kind of prepping to get to that part, and you have like a strategy and a vision, just someone comes in and like does like a massive pivot that can be, obviously hard to swallow. So yeah, I'm just thinking like, does this actually mean that like you should either like look for someone who will be with like full open arms, or like should you kind of look for someone who agrees with the certain points that you talk about?
Yeah. Again, that totally depends on the level of person that you're willing to bring in. I think if you, let's say you had an advisor, let's say you figured out like, hey, this is actually kind of the type of fractional CMO that we need based on their skill set, based on what they've seen. And then that person comes in and says, hey, actually, I have a different plan for you. It's probably still within their skill set, right? They're not going to say like, hey, you brought me in as like my background is in brand content and community, and I'm going to do all these like conversion focused demand gen programs and et cetera, et cetera. And like, we really need to focus over here. Um, it's probably it's probably a subtler tweak than you would think. But if you are bringing somebody in at like the toppest level of marketing to be a fractional head of marketing, um, and they're telling you that you need a different set of programs or work streams, I think it is open, like you should be open to listening to them. You could also decide then when you listen to them, hey, I'm not fully convinced. I'm going to go find somebody to actually do my plan. And that goes back to that idea of like, it is the founder or CEO's vision, you know? They do get to point people in the right direction and find the right resource for what they think is best.
We're getting near the end here. I was curious on, is there a time where let's say you hire a fractional marketing person, and in 6 months all the gears are firing, everything's moving forward, the business is growing, life is good. At what point do you want to like convince them to bring them on full time? How do you know then it's ready to like, I guess I want to say take it to the next level? Maybe that's not quite right.
Yeah. Well, I feel like obviously financially when it makes sense, but you're probably paying somebody fractional pretty close because you only want them to have one or two clients at a time. You're probably paying them pretty close to full time anyways. So I know that it's usually not so big of a financial leap to bring them full time. But obviously you want to make sure that your budget and your growth supports bringing that person in full time. And I think by then the benefit of fractionals, you really get to test out that culture fit before you ever invest in someone. And then when they come on board, they don't have the onboarding that a new fresh hire has, right? They have more context. They're able to just put more, fuel on the fire, so to speak. So I would say it's definitely a business decision on whether or not you want to keep them fractional versus bring them in full time. It's usually not a huge decision, but you get to, when you fall in love with that person that's doing that role, just try to reel them in.
So would you say that like starting off fractional is actually a good way to kind of scout for someone full time? Like if you, for instance, are looking to hire your next marketing leader, do you advise people to actually start with like a full time as basically a test project?
Yeah, I mean, that has to work on both sides, right? There's lots of people that just want to get hired in full time. There's lots of people who have kind of been around the block, especially in tech, and are a little exhausted and want to make sure that it's the right fit on both sides before they put all their eggs in their basket. So I think it has to work on both sides. I would never say like you have to do fractional before you bring somebody in full time, but there is a real benefit in that on both sides that you kind of get to test it out and make sure it's a good fit before you have somebody and then have to, think about employment law and all of those things in order to fire them if it's not working out. And I think that there's a lot of people, especially in tech, that are a little more hesitant, a little more reserved, and really want to make sure it's a good fit before they join. And I had something else to say about why it's so beneficial for the person on the fractional side. Oh, I will say that's exactly what happened with my current role. Is I was fractional at Coderis starting in February, and then went full time with them in July, and even before that was advising for like a year and a half before that. And so it was a slow play by Tony, the CEO. He knew that I, had this background and candidly burnout from being in a lot of tech startups and then at a VC firm, and then having a baby at the beginning of COVID and being a working mom and all that stuff. So he played the long game with me, and it worked. And so it can be really beneficial to both sides to kind of test it out in a trial run for a couple months before both people are like, yeah, let's go, I'm all in.
Yeah, I think especially for someone, as you said, like who has experience like burned out and like worked with different cultures. I also have to say that I appreciated, doing the whole fractional thing before I fully committed, so that I knew like the relationship, the dynamics, the real expectations, and like the real, situation and culture.
Yeah.
So I want to get into the last question here. So Margaret, you've seen the evolution of remote work and distributed teams. I would just love to, where do you paint a picture for where do you think remote work and fractional work evolve in the next couple of years?
Yeah, it's really funny because I did start remote at Envision before remote was cool. It was a decade ago. My mom was like not convinced that it was a real job. I'm like, I don't know. They sent me a computer. I do stuff on it all day long. The direct deposit hits my bank account. I'm pretty sure this is real, But it was such a different way of working back then than we were used to. It was actually even before we had Slack. We had Skype. I was like, my onboarding was like, here's 35 people to add on Skype. And that was how we did it before Slack. I will say that at the time, it was very clear that remote work was a skill set. And there was a lot of fantastic people that joined Envision who couldn't cut it in a remote setting, but were very, very fantastic in an office setting, right? Like it's not that their quality of work was bad or they were a bad human being or had no motivation. They just didn't know how to cut it in remote life. And so I saw that and I was like, oh, this is a new type of skill set or a new type of ability to be able to do. And then it was really interesting to watch it happen in the COVID and post-COVID days where there was a rapid adoption throughout most all companies that could to have their workforce be remote. But I was keeping that in the back of my mind, which is like, this is not for everyone. And so it is interesting to see the come back to the office culture, the hybrid thing going on, the total remote thing. I don't think that it's a skill set that can't be learned, but I do think it is fundamentally really challenging if you are naturally somebody that gets inspired by being co-working in real life with people to then be successful in a remote circumstance if you don't have the skill set already like naturally intrinsically within you. I tend to be somebody that like absorbs people's emotions when I'm around them. So in office, like full time in an office is horrible for me because I just like walk around and I'm like, that person's stepping differently. I wonder what's going on in their life. Or like that person just left the office or that meeting room and they look upset. I wonder like what's, like I was just like constantly scanning. And so it's really nice for me to be remote, but I also have a lot of like probably anxiety, but I have like, I'm always like trying to prove my worth. And that's really good for a remote worker to have that kind of like intrinsic feeling of like, have I done enough today? Have I shown my work today? Have I pushed this along enough to make sure that people know that I'm working, right? Like, is my Slack status active? Like, do people see that I'm here and responding? And so that is a helpful in a remote setting because you do want people to have a bias towards putting the thing in Slack and sending the thing that's done or getting visibility on something that was just started to show that there's momentum. That's like a very beneficial thing for remote workers to have kind of intrinsically within them.
Margaret, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all these insights.
Yeah, happy to be here. This was really fun.
And thanks to our listeners for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, like, subscribe, and tell your friends so we can carry on enticing awesome and influential guests to join us and share their remarkable journeys. If you subscribe through the Plugin.fm website, you'll get early bird access to our future content. Plugin.fm is brought to you by Freemius, your all-in-one payment, subscription, and taxes platform for selling software plugins, themes, and software as a service. If you're struggling to grow your software revenue, send a note to contact@freemius.com to get free advice from Freemius's monetization experts. My name is Patrick Rolland, and thanks for listening to Plugin.fm.